All right, identity theft, part 2. Identity theft strikes stealthily. And today we're going to see how Peter made it easy for Jesus to teach the fineries of detecting and deflecting the counterfeit, and how to grab one's true identity, lose it, and get it back. We will see that. Now I'm holding in my hands a $1 million bill.
Whoa.
$1 million. Yes, it's fake. Can you tell the difference between a well-crafted counterfeit bill and the real thing? And really, unless you've been trained, it's doubtful you could detect a good counterfeit. And, we got to be skillful in detecting the counterfeits of ourself, within ourself, our integrated identity. Who you think you are, or is who you think you are exactly who God called you to be? Is who you think you are exactly who God called you to be? Has your true identity been misdirected? Now answer this. Are you doing exactly what God placed you on earth to do? Are you even aware of what God called you to do? Everyone on earth believes that they're here for a purpose, but few know what that purpose is. And how come so many adults, since their youth, have had a longing to be nurses or teachers or doctors or soldiers or musicians or artists? Think about it. If a secular calling can be so vivid and so clear that people spend their entire lives trying to fulfill that dream, what about our spiritual identity that is designed to be integrated into that same life? Where have we lost that? I think we need to report a few identity thefts. I think we need to, we need to wonder how many people on earth have just lived a counterfeit life. A life that's been counterfeited. Sidney J. Harris said, quote, men make counterfeit money. In more cases, money makes counterfeit men. End of quote. See, it takes hunger to discover our true calling and a lifetime of effort to maintain its integration into our current life. There's nothing wrong with being a doctor or a nurse or an actor or an artist. Nothing wrong with being a soldier. But how can your true identity be integrated into that to where it becomes the dominant factor? Another life. Sounds like a soap opera. If you've been raised by a different family, married a different person, had a different education, if you had not had that accident, that sickness, or certain mistreatment in your childhood, would you be a different person than you are right now? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Would you see yourself different than you see yourself now? Yeah. My son has an excellent friend named Andre. And this guy lives in New York City. But he was raised and spent his entire childhood in an orphanage, an inner city orphanage in New York City. And do you think if he'd been raised by a wealthy family in the suburbs that he would be a different person?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Andre's great the way he is. But my point again this week revolves around identity theft. This is part 2. What has been stolen or hidden from our lives that we still have yet to uncover? And I guarantee you will find things as we continue in this course. Quote, Real happiness is cheap enough, yet how dearly we pay for its counterfeit. End of quote. Hosea Ballou. Real happiness is cheap enough, yet how dearly we pay for its counterfeit. You know, what's really important? And that's the answer that Jesus is going to answer that question in this section here. You get what you expect. I had a friend who was raised by a wealthy family, and this lady seemed to have all the luck. And she would randomly be given tickets to major league sporting events many times in the few years that I worked with her. One time she walked into a furniture store and they gave her a couch because she was the 100,000th person to enter that store. And stuff like that happened to her all the time. And I asked her once, I said, it amazes me that you get so many things given to you and that you win so many contests. What's up? And she said, I was raised to expect abundance. I was raised to expect abundance. See, the same will work for us. You know, expect abundance. You might just get it. Get out of the poor head. Get out of the sick head. Get out of the feel sorry for yourself head. You know, get in, expect the abundance. You will get it. Now, here's a review. Now, last week we saw how Jesus took his apostles and some disciples to the Syrian border, the very northern pinnacle of Israel, to a multicultural town for a little R&R. Because you'll find, if you keep reading, they stayed there about a week. And they also got a lot of teaching during that time. It was at the foot of the perpetually snow-capped Mount Hermon, which jets up to about 9,232 feet at its highest point. In fact, it is the only ski resort in that area of the world. And much of the water that feeds Israel comes from the snow runoff that funnels from it into the Jordan River, and it comes on down. See, Caesarea Philippi, or Paneas, is lush, beautiful, and prosperous. And this town was an important crossroad, a trade route, and a great trading post. And not to mention it was dedicated to the Greek god Pan. And I'm not sure if you knew that we get our word panic from the terror supposedly caused by this local god named Pan. Get it? Panic? That's where it came from. The Greek god Pan was sought out to cause confusion into one's enemy, not to mention he was worshipped to improve one's sexuality. And he's that elusive, devious, goat-footed, pan-pipe playing, god. And he's the one that Disney designed Peter Pan after, who plays the same type of flute. I looked at some of the statues after this. Some of them are pretty graphic. If you Google it, it's sort of sick when you look up Pan. But I just thought, how interesting it is how Disney uses, some of the mythology and ancient religions to put images in our heads as to what, is normal in today's society. It's sort of crazy. And for a temple to be carved and for grottos to be built into solid rock, Pan must have been huge in that area. You don't just build what would today be multi-million-dollar marble temples and carve into solid stone to put statues of this goat-footed thing. See, so it had to be big. But, so that's where they were, Pania. It was beautiful, lush, waterfalls. I mean, it was an incredibly nice area, right at the foot of Mount Hermon. You walk up that in the summer, the average temperature would be 65 degrees at the top of Mount Hermon. So it would have been a great place to get away from the summer heat of that Middle Eastern area. So here's a believing side note. If people fully believe that a certain statue or God with a small g will help them, could they get the answer to their prayers?
Yes.
Sure. Remember, God designed the entire universe to rain down blessings to anyone, good or bad, who puts the effort into believing. So this really doesn't pertain to this teaching, but it is a lesson in believing. You know, if you want something, if you need something, go get it. You know, it's got to be there. It has to be there. That sale, that job, that love, it has to be there. So back to why Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi. Now, of course, this goat-faced pan god was not why Jesus and his boys were in that city. He could care less. But he was there to teach and show them a lesson that they had to understand, or they would allow their identity to be stolen at the very next turn of events. And you'll see how fast it can happen here. It can happen so quickly if we don't stay sharp. See, Peter's duplistic nature made it easy for Jesus to teach this lesson. See, Jesus' ultimate mission that week was far greater than identity theft. It was understanding in depth one's true godly identity. Now, a little geography. You ever heard of the road to Damascus? That's where it started, Pania. And then it heads east, right under Mount Hermon, goes 40 miles to Damascus. So the Acts 9 fame, where Paul was on the road to Damascus, where Jesus talked to him, that's close to the same area they are right now. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
That's the road to Damascus. Just a little bit of history there. Remember, it's all part of the Roman Empire. All of that is. So Jesus had the availability to travel like anybody else could. Anybody could travel at that day and time and trade, because it was ruled by Rome. Jesus had full traveling access, and he used it. That's why he was there. And so Jesus prepares his disciples. Now, verse 20 and 21 of Matthew 16, we got to read together to get the fullness of what was about to happen. See, the book of Luke has a parallel record in 9, 20, and 21. You don't need to turn there. But it combines these two verses into one thought. And basically, in my terminology, stop telling anyone that I'm the Christ, because I'm about to get brutally attacked in Jerusalem by the religious leaders who will have me killed, but I will rise from the dead 3 days later. That's basically what it says. So here we are, verse 20, Matthew 16. And then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was the Christ. I think we read this last week. From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and be raised from the dead. So now, about halfway through Jesus' ministry, he's telling his most faithful followers, I'm going to get tortured and I'm going to get murdered, but I'm getting back up. Now imagine knowing that. How would Jesus have known that he was getting back up? The scriptures. Wasn't Jonah a Christ type? Yeah, Jesus knew this stuff. Anybody who was really into the truth of the word at that day and time understood that the Christ would rise from the dead. So it's pretty wild. But he believed it. How many things have you been told about yourself that you don't believe? That's the identity theft. That's the counterfeit we're talking about. You know, a parallel record in Mark chapter 9:31 says, quote, he began to teach them. He began to teach them. Whereas in Matthew it says he was going to show them. Jesus began to show them. So it's a show. Show means show. Teach means teach. But one gospel record, Mark says teach, this says show. So you have to see both in here. You've got to be able to see both. You got to see the show and the tell. And it adds depth, it adds colors to that began to show. You know, and it would be both a verbal and a physical lesson, which Jesus is going to do as a competent and master teacher here. So how is Jesus going to show this lesson about what he's about to teach? So enter the movable stone. Peter was feeling pretty good about what Jesus had just told him in front of his friends, his family. Yes, he had family members there, and other disciples. Peter stood a little bit taller. You know, I think a barely perceptible smile would have begun to crank the corners of his mouth up on his tanned face. I mean, how would you feel if Jesus called you out in front of hundreds of disciples, loud enough for them all to hear, and told you that you were awesome, that you're sharp, and that you're in tune with the creator of the universe? How would you feel? It'd make you feel pretty good. I mean, Peter's feeling pretty good. He's a little taller in his sandals. You'd feel like $1 million. A real $1 million. You know, Peter just answered the question. Peter had just answered this question posed by Jesus. Who do you say that I am? Remember, the other disciples said, oh, you're John the Baptist risen from the dead. You're one of the old prophets reincarnated, whatever. But then Jesus goes, well, who do you guys say that I am? And then Peter said, to everyone's amazement, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. See, that's exactly who Jesus is. Peter nailed it. Boom. You know, he was not an emperor god like the Caesars believed themselves to be. He was not a devious local deity like Pan. He was not a reincarnation of his cousin John or the prophets of old. He was and still is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter's comment was so succinct, so universally accurate, so well said that it even astounded Jesus Christ. Like I said in part 1 of this teaching, Jesus was so blessed by Peter's answer that he told him, bravo, Peter! You've just figured out how to receive revelation. Great job. Jesus said, yes, Peter, you got it. You didn't just come up with that information out of your own head, nor did you get that understanding from any live human being, from any human being. You didn't get it from listening to other people. You didn't get it from books or from the internet. You tapped in to the very heart of God. You gained access to the power of the universe. You're amazing, Peter. You're a free thinker. You didn't allow others to steal or to skew your perception of me. You are the real deal, Peter. Sort of how it went in expanded verse. See, this teaching I'm doing has gone on for 2 weeks, but what happened in Matthew 16 probably took place in less than 2 minutes. It was a succession of lessons that etched an identity. Peter proves Jesus right. See, just seconds after Jesus told them to stop telling people that he was the Christ and that he was going to be tortured and killed in Jerusalem, Peter literally grabs Jesus, stands up, walks over to where Jesus is. Maybe he was sitting down, maybe he was standing up, and he grabs Jesus and pulls him out of the crowd. What do you think people were thinking? How weird would that be? This guy's teaching. He just started. And now this guy grabs him, yanks him forcibly out of that crowd. Verse 22, then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, "Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee." Didn't Jesus just say that he was going to suffer many things at the hands of the Jews? What's Peter doing here? He's doing exactly what Jesus said he was going to do. People are going to contradict and mistreat him. Peter was the first. It's crazy. The word rebuke means to forbid him to speak. He wouldn't let Jesus talk. He forbade him from speaking. Where on earth could he have thought that was right? After what Jesus just told him about himself. He pulled Jesus aside and told him to shut up. He told Jesus that what he just said was not the way things are going to go down. As he's pulling him aside. Now, did Peter mean well? Yeah. But does meaning well mean that you're right? No. There's a lot of people who mean well as they reach into your back pocket or they stab a knife into your heart. They mean well. People always say, well, I only did it because I was told to do that. I was mean to you because I was told to by my superiors. And I always say, that's what the Nazis said. That's what the Nazis said. Well, I was told to do that. It's hard to take a stand against the machine. Peter grabbed Jesus, pulled him aside out of the group, and boldly and with force contradicted totally what Jesus was saying. He said, "You're dead wrong, Jesus. It's not going to happen the way that you're saying. Not under my watch. They're going to have to go through me to get to you, dude. No one's going to mistreat and kill you." Sounds good. It's nice. But it's not true. See, Peter had just lost his newfound identity. 1 minute before, he was praised by Jesus for tapping into the heart of God. Now, wait till you see what Jesus is going to say. See, whenever we put our thoughts above the calling of God, we've traded identities. We've traded in a new car for an old car, for a beater. Matching force with force. For Jesus to act the way he did in this next verse, he must have matched or mirrored Peter's intensity. Fire with fire, hard with hard. Verse 23, but he, Jesus, turned and said unto Peter. So now he turns into Peter's grip. Peter had dragged him out from the edge of this crowd. There was hundreds of people there. As you keep reading this record, there's a multitude. He drags him aside. He's at the edge of the group, reproving Jesus, telling him to shut up. And then Jesus turns into his grip, looks him in the eye, and he said, "Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." Quite a switch from seconds earlier? Didn't he just tell Peter in front of everyone that he was amazing and that he had just tapped into the very heart of God because he correctly identified the Christ, the essence of the Christ? Now Jesus is forcefully telling Peter in front of everyone that he's a tool of the devil, a stumbling block to Jesus. And here's why. It's because he loves what people think of him more than he loves his godly identity. That's where it says that he goes, you savor us not the things that be of God, but those things that be of men. You love, you savor. You love the things of men more than you love the things of God. That's identity theft, folks. Just something. See, he's being more concerned with what others think than living out our own true calling is still the weak link of Christianity. Like I read about a few weeks ago, many Pentecostal churches across the United States are beginning to downplay speaking in tongues or eradicate it from their churches because it's now socially unpopular. Doesn't 1 Corinthians say that we should all speak with tongues? Yeah. Okay. Wasn't speaking in tongues the very first act of Christianity? It's the very first breath that any Christian took. Was they spoke in tongues. That's something. I think this topic needs a fresh look, but not today. Remember, everyone's watching and listening. Peter was Jesus' living show and tell example. What Peter felt at that moment was overpowered by his true calling, his new identity with Christ, or it overpowered it, should I say. See, Peter did learn. Peter evolved. As we know, as you read the book of Acts, he didn't let that knock him out. He learned from it. And it made him stronger. We can too. Quote, true friends appear less moved than counterfeit friends. Homer. A true friend isn't going to move out as quick as a counterfeit friend. My wife and I call them church friends. They like you as long as you're in their group. You leave the group and then they hate you. Work friends can be the same way. You see, a true friend, will not be moved as easily as a church friend, a counterfeit friend. Avoiding identity theft. See, Peter may have been licking his wounds. I don't know how I'd feel. Because Jesus walked back into the middle of that crowd and might have grabbed Peter and pulled him with him. Maybe he's had to stand there at the edge and get his wits back together, which is probably what happened. How would you have handled that if you had been Jesus? You would have walked back in and kept on track, right? That's what he proved he did over and over. Peter had to get his wits back about him. And we're not going to see today, but next week we'll see how he did. Avoiding identity theft. Of course, like I said, Peter might have been licking his wounds, but Jesus keeps surging ahead. After that intense interchange with Peter, Mark 8:32 adds some color commentary to this record. And Jesus raises his voice and calls over to him and possibly Peter the multitude of people who had been following. So now Jesus calls the crowd back, calls everybody over. Come over here. See, now this lesson's going to be he wants everybody to hear what's about to happen. Most of them were probably aware of what just happened. But now he wants everybody to hear this. And this, we're going to find out, we're going to see 3 suggestions to maintain your spiritual identity. You know, Jesus had their full attention. And here's the follow-up lesson. But he wants everybody to hear this now. Not just Peter, not just the apostles, not just the disciples, everybody who was in attendance. Verse 24. But it doesn't say it in Matthew here. It does in Mark 8:32. Verse 24 of Matthew. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Now, how many months probably before this is going to really happen to Jesus? Maybe 4, 5, 6 months away. So this had to be a common expression. See, if you're planning on following Jesus the Christ, here are 3 requirements in verse 24. To deny yourself, to take up your cross, and to follow Jesus Christ. What do these things mean? Let's break it down a little bit, because they could be important. This could be the whole point of this whole lesson here. The term come after me simply means to follow behind or to catch up, if you see the context. So when Jesus said come after me, it just means to follow behind or catch up. Context will tell you that. If you plan on catching up to and keeping pace with Jesus Christ, here's what even we need to do. 1, deny himself or deny ourselves. It means to deny yourself totally. To disown yourself. That's the definition. It's to abstain from your normal ways. I had to really think this through. What does this mean? To totally change the way you live, to completely change your old way of life. New man, old man. Old man, new man. Don't go back to doing those inbred, impure, or cultural things that you know are not good. If you know something's not good for you, stop it. If you know it's spiritually wrong, stop it. See, even if you think they define you, well, I'm Irish, so I drink. You see, I'm Italian, so accept my hot temper. Get used to it. Or I'm from the South, so that I'm going to lie to you while smiling and handing you a nice cold glass of sweet tea. See, that cultural stuff steals your identity. Can. You can use it to your advantage, or you can use it to your dismay. Second thing is take up your cross, which we're going to cover in a second. And the third one is follow me. Now, this term follow me doesn't mean to walk behind or catch up. It means to travel at the exact same road, at the exact same time, at the exact same place. It means to accompany, to walk side by side. So that's the third. So deny yourself, take up your cross, and walk right next to me. Okay, so take up his cross. You got to explain that. It's easy to understand the terms deny yourself. It's not easy to do, because all we're trained to do is watch out for me, myself, and I. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's that's what people are taught, to really work on building your own equity, your own stockpile, so that you'll have this. And I mean, it's not bad, but it can be a detriment if you truly want to walk side by side with Jesus Christ. So here we are. It's a bit harder to understand words that ooze with religious fervor, like the term "take up your cross." Because you always get, it's hard to not have the mind picture of some bloodied guy dragging this huge, carved wooden cross through some bumpy streets. That's not what this is talking about. Not at all what this is talking about. Doesn't mean carry your burdens, accept your lot in life. That's not what this is talking about. What does it mean? This is the first of maybe 3 times that Jesus used this expression. And this was months before his crucifixion. Everyone in Jesus' group and probably everyone in the Roman Empire were familiar with that saying. It had to be a common saying. Take up your cross. You know, everyone understood it. It couldn't have been just a Jesus-ism that only he said. You know, the churches have squeezed out every ounce of emotional religiosity from it, but they've totally missed the point. In a nutshell, probably everyone in Israel, as well as the entire Roman Empire, had witnessed a crucifixion or smelled it. You know, there had been literally thousands of them in Israel during the years that Jesus walked the earth. Remember how during Jesus' childhood, the Romans had publicly crucified about 2,000 followers of Judas the Galilean, who was trying to kick the Romans out of Israel. And that was done along the street. Jesus and most of his apostles were raised. Most crucified victims were left to rot on those posts that were always put beside public roads, public walkways. Many would have had a sign erected above their head. That was their cross. And their current public identity that they took to their grave were described in words painted on that placard, their cross, their headstone, so to speak. It was one succinct phrase that described their defining life decision. That's your cross. Those few words reflected their impact on society. What will people say about you in one sentence? You know, who are you? What would go on your headstone? What will go on your headstone? You know, what do others remember about you? What would you say you are in one sentence? That's your identity. If you had an hour to think about it and to write down one sentence of exactly who you are, one sentence, that's your identity. That's your cross. Headstone wisdom. Now, I looked up a few famous or funny sayings on headstones. One family wrote for their godless loved one, quote, "Here lies an atheist, all dressed up and no place to go." A man named Billy Wilder's headstone said, "I'm a writer, but then nobody's perfect." And that's on his gravestone. A lady named Kay finally shares her secret fudge recipe. Someone had the entire fudge recipe etched onto her headstone. You know, what recipe describes your life? You know, what's your secret recipe? The person who buried this next lady must have been a little bit bitter. Just a little bit. Her headstone said, quote, "Evelyn Janes never sought gainful employment." That's her headstone. You know, what's God employed you to do? Speaking of bitter, this man must have carefully crafted his own words. His says, Andrew J. Olzak, "Abandoned in old age by wife and children, may God be more understanding and merciful." That's sad. But he had etched onto that's his epitaph. See, if you're going to write an epitaph, be sure to use spell check. One grave marker from 1976 says, quote, James Anthony Katona, our little angle. A-N-G-L-E instead of A-N-G-E-L. Our little angle. The actor Jack Lemmon, on his headstone, it sets him up for his next starring role. It simply reads, Jack Lemmon in. And then there's a big blank spot. Big blank spot right after the word in. One comedian had a final joke engraved on his gravestone. Rodney Dangerfield's grave marker says, quote, there goes the neighborhood. Now, Thomas Jefferson worked on his own, and he spent many hours trying to figure out what he wanted put on his. This is his cross. This is his epitaph. This is his identity. And he had written, here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, and the father of the University of Virginia. That's who he was. I think you get the point of the term take up your cross. It means pick up on the simple essence of who you are designed to be and never let go. You take it to your grave. This is me, and nobody's going to stop me from being me. Are people going to try to stop you from being who you are? Yeah. Who will usually be the most vehement at it? Family, people closest to you. They'll usually be the ones that'll work the hardest to stop you. Or your church friends. So to summarize the 3 points to maintaining your identity, and again, simply, if you'd like to walk side by side with Jesus Christ, then stop bending to what others say you are. Grip tightly on your well thought through godly identity and keep up. I'll say it again. If you'd like to walk side by side with Jesus Christ, then stop bending to what others say you are. Grip tightly on your well thought through godly identity and keep up. Verse 25, and whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. See, we lose our identity as we live for selfish reasons. And it's real hard not to. I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to go here. The bucket list. There's nothing altruistic in a bucket list. I haven't seen it. Maybe there is an altruistic bucket list. In other words, good for everyone else. Most bucket lists is, I want this, and I want that, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to see that, and I'm going... Nothing wrong with that. But let the highlight of your life, the essence of your being, your true identity, be the shine through everything that you do. Right? We'll find our true identity as we give our true selves to help others. Here's an example. When Josephine and I were newlyweds, we once attended an exceptional Get Rich Quick seminar. And during this presentation, he said that we could make money hand over fist in no time if we would just sign on with him. And of course, I had dollar signs in my eyes. $1 million signs in my eyes. This guy could talk. And I could see myself doing what he was saying. He made it sound so doggone easy to make money and to get rich. And he made it exciting. And it had to be the greatest business opportunity of a lifetime, I thought at that moment. Well, after the presentation, the speaker's wife came up to Josephine and I, and she pulled us out of the crowd and took us to the side of this room. And she must have recognized that familiar glazed, slap-happy look in my eyes. And yeah, and she had already heard that we were young ministers, and she walked up to us in all her expensive jewelry, and she pushed her finger right into my chest and looked me straight in the eyes, and she said, "My husband also used to be a pastor until he got involved in this business." And then she quoted verse 26 verbatim. She said, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" And then she turned around and walked away. And so did we. See, I was shocked by her timing, but blessed by her words. And she taught me about maintaining one's identity. It's the hardest thing we'll ever have to do, folks. Maintain our spiritual identity. Verse 27, "For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he shall reward every man according to his works." That says a lot. That's definitely a Wednesday topic right there. You see, here's a verse that gives hope and vision. And if you think nobody sees the good that you've done, think again. We just heard someone say that this morning. It's good to know that God sees the good that you and others have done. My wife was once told by one of her nun teachers, she said, "You might be surprised who makes it to heaven." You might be surprised who actually makes it to heaven. And Josephine thought, that's weird, because nuns are pretty religious creatures. But this woman was smart enough to understand that it may not be who you think. Josephine's dad used to be a barber at the Waldorf Astoria, and he cut hair for a lot of rich men. John F. Kennedy, Frank Sinatra, one of the richest guys in the world at that time, this guy, Baruch, Bernard Baruch. Then, and then he would cut the religious guys' hairs, like was it a bishop or something like that? Bishop Sheen. And I've seen him on TV, actually. He's a well-spoken guy. They still do reruns of this guy. Well, he's been getting his hair cut, and Josephine's dad asked him, "How come you don't want to become cardinal?" I guess that's the next step. And he said, "I don't want to lose my soul." Isn't that crazy? That's crazy. I've worked in groups before. The higher you get, the uglier it looks. It's sad. It's a sad thing. The word for angels is the word messengers. And one translation actually even says herd. Jesus' posse, his herd, his tribe. Verse 28, "Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Now I thought, what a way to cap off a day or 5 minutes. This wasn't all that long of a teaching here. And there may have been hundreds in the crowd that day near Peneus. It had been almost 2,000 years since Jesus had taught this lesson. See, everyone's long since died except for him. He's still not returned to earth with his angelic herd, or his herd of messengers, his messenger tribe. but it must mean that some of the group present will escape the second death of the judgment of the unjust, because they would not have known what the gathering together was yet. It also means that some of the people at that meeting will taste the second death. It's quite a chunk of revelation to throw out there. That's pretty heavy stuff right after morning prayers, wouldn't you say? What a lesson. In the shadow of Mount Hermon, snow-capped and cool, near the city that was built for the devious deity Pan, surrounded by rivers and streams and waterfalls and crickets and chirping birds, Jesus teaches a lesson on how to avoid spiritual identity theft. Peter inadvertently became his main prop in that he changed so quickly from being exactly right to being totally wrong. Boom, boom. Peter allowed easy access to the enemy in seconds. What can we do to avoid the same trap? How can we hang on to our own personal spiritual identity or find it? Again, if you would like to walk side by side with Jesus Christ, then stop bending to what others say you are. Grip tightly on your well-thought-through godly identity and keep up with the pace set by Jesus Christ. This is how we beat spiritual identity theft. Your cross is simply holding on to the essence of who you spiritually and really are, and letting no man rip it out of your hands till the day you die. What does your sign say? To avoid identity theft, hang on to your true spiritual identity and never let go. God bless.